To break up the good conversations going in the room. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to those who joined us online for our AMI roundtable. This was a suggestion that came from the Member Services Committee, and we've had a couple of different things at conference. We've had a couple of webinars, but this is really meant to be just more of a chance for us to all sit down and talk and do a peer exchange about AMI. So whether you're just considering going to AMI, we have a couple people that can talk, well, a lot of people probably in the room that can talk about some tips for when you're preparing for AMI. So we'll do that for the first half hour-ish, and then we'll go to post AMI and what you do with all that data and some things that we have to share with you from the city of Fulton. So with us today, we have Skip Schaller. He's the General Manager of Utilities with the City of Monette. Jeff Bergstrom is the General Manager of Marshall Municipal Utilities. Daryl Dunlap is the Utilities Superintendent with the City of Fulton. And then Greg Kalkari, did I say that correctly? Okay, is the founder and owner of Empower Innovations. He is one of our associate members and has a great product that was specifically designed for municipal utilities. So looking forward to the discussion. So to start out, I figured we'd kind of go back and forth between Skip and Jeff, and they agreed to talk a little bit about some tips to consider when you're going to AMI. So Skip and Jeff, just to start out with, can you tell us, just so everyone knows, as you talk through things, who your meter supplier is and whether you use staff, your own staff to install the AMI meters, or if you use contractors? Skip?
Yeah, Connie, we decided to go with Vision Metering. They're out of South Carolina, and one of the reasons I picked them was it was a fairly easy setup, and our staff is doing all the work.
Okay, Jeff.
We're using let's go see it's short cord here. We're kind of on our second round of AMI. Much better luck on round 2. We are currently using Landis and Gear meters, and we did do the install for the meters, and the routers. But we're happy with what we have right now.
Okay, that's good to hear. All right, so Skip, you're in the process of installing AMI, and I think a lot of people that are considering going to either their boards or their city councils are probably a little nervous possibly about getting this passed. It's a big expenditure for the city, but a very important investment going forward for utilities. So tell us a little bit about your process of getting it approved, deciding on a vendor, and what lessons you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think I've worked on this for several years, even before we up and pulled the trigger. When I first kind of stepped into it and was looking at it, I even tried some sample meters, some areas, and we were trying stuff, and I kind of quickly realized we're not a big utility. There's not a lot of, it's me and then the field people, and I realized right quick I'm a bit over my head as far as being able to process what all I needed to process. So probably the process that we use to kind of help me get narrowed down to where I wanted to go was I went and got a consultant. We got Toth out of Springfield, and I think at that time Carthage had used them for their project, and they were a big help for me. I was able to sit down and tell them, okay, here's kind of what I'm looking for. They did all of the work, basically talking to vendors. And I can give them several options that I wanted to look at. They did all the work, kind of got everything put together, went through all of the packages, which I think we ended up getting like 12 vendors submitted, and I don't know how I would have got through all the 50 or 60 page submissions and try to sort it all out. They got to put it into a format down to something to where we could window it down pretty easy to 3 or 4 vendors. And at that point, they kind of helped. We did several calls, references, talked to some people, and kind of helped me get pushed in the direction where we ended up going anyway. And I think the getting it past the council, that wasn't too terribly bad. I mean, our system's been good, but it was getting to be 15 years old. They understood it was time. And honestly, I really didn't get a whole lot of pushback from our council on making the change. They were good about, I pretty well knew about how much it was going to be, when we were going to need to spend it, and we planned for it.
So do you think it was worth the money to go ahead and hire a contractor?
Yes. Hell yeah. Yeah, I think for
Pretty
us, it was
resounding
like,
positive.
yeah, there was about $5,000. And I mean, to me, that was a drop in the bucket. And for what I got out of it, because like I said, I talked to Tantalus and I talked to somebody, so we have an Itron drive-by system and it works well. I talked to several vendors and like I said, I was just kind of confused. I need a little bit of help to kind of help narrow down and have numbers all in one place where I could look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And Jeff, so the reason why Jeff's here today, he he's on his second AMI system. He was an early adopter of AMI in Marshall. And so the first one was about 15 years ago. So having your experience under your belt, Jeff, what are some of the fundamental things that you did differently the second time around? Or if you had to do it yet again, hopefully not in your career necessarily, but what would you share with the group?
Well, our first system, again, it was early on, I believe, 2008. It wasn't AMR, it was AMI, which was pretty early on for AMI platforms. I think one of the issues we had having it be early on was how fast technology was moving forward. We had Landis and Gear meters, which we were happy with. We'd moved to those on our commercial and industrial accounts several years earlier, away from mechanical. And we went with a separate vendor on the for the AMI modules. And shortly afterwards, once we started seeing some AMI failures on those, when the modules failed, they were obsolete. So you get a new module, it would not communicate with the system you had. So it wasn't long after that we were really going to have to put a whole new system in and run two systems for the module we were using, or just get a whole new system. So kind of like Skip did, we didn't get with a consultant, but we had some proposals and things that we looked at. We knew we wanted to go with one vendor. Something we wrote in the contract was backwards compatibility. We put a 10-year clause in there. So when we put something in, it wasn't obsolete in 4 or 5 years. So I think that was important. And that clause was good. Anytime you buy some electronic, you're going to get firmware upgrades. So as long as we maintain and do the firmware software upgrades, we're able to, to kind of protect ourselves from being outdated. But so we kind of did that. We looked at a couple. We were familiar with Landis and Gear. We had the meter programming software. If we hadn't been happy there, we would have had to learn a whole new system. When you got your meter techs, they get comfortable with one software system, trying to move them to something else to program and read meters. So we went ahead and went with Landis on both Gridstream and the meter. And that was, I think we completed install in 2017. So, and we've, knocked on wood, I don't think we had one disconnect failure in 6 years. We went ahead and did disconnects on all residential meters. And so far we've had really good luck.
So one of those, I think, I'm assuming you said you went with it with the new system. So for auto disconnects, would you suggest that was probably a priority maybe when you went to?
I would. It's I think it improves customer service, not just for, I think we all have people come in the office and they want to get turned on and they get in line. I mean, it might be, if you come in at 1 o'clock, it might be the next day before we get to them and turn them on. Well, with disconnects, if you've got somebody that's off and needs to be turned on, I think you're able to respond to the customer's needs a little bit better. So it's not just the part for people that don't pay, but it's for the people that pay, not having to wait for us to do that service. You don't have to have that truck roll out. Just a lot of benefits there.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes cities that have a big residential renter population, they found that that's very helpful too, because like in Columbia, for instance, all the leases end in July and August, and you're just slammed with turning on new accounts and shutting off the old ones. So very nice. Thank you for sharing that. So Skip, you had talked to me a little bit about, years ago, there was an organization called Take Back Your Power, which was, I think, kind of a pyramid scheme, but basically you could buy these videos and they will tell you, it was actually fairly well produced, but this video was all about how your AMI is going to completely ruin your health. Electric and magnetic fields were your enemies, and everything possible that could be blamed on them were blamed on them. And then you could buy some and then sell other people, but it was a pyramid scheme, basically. Big talking point, hit the internet. And there was a group in Colombia that started it. And so I didn't know whether that was still a thing, whether if you're going to AMI, you should be concerned about people who are afraid of the EMF coming off of the meters, and if you should do something proactively about it. Skip, I thought you had a really good approach. Do you mind sharing the story?
Yeah. And we haven't had much issues. But this one lady called in one day and she's fairly nice, but she was upset, older lady. And we had changed the meter and I don't know what happened. She said her stove went bad and, we basically pulled the meter and we caused a surge or something and we didn't. But we argued around for a while and finally I got her talked off of that. But then she had done some research, kind of what you're saying, come back with, well, she's concerned about the way radio or whatever coming off of the meter and it could cause problems. And we had quite a back and forth discussion there. And because I said, well, if you're concerned about that, do you have a cell phone? And she said, I knew you were going to ask that. But we talked for a while and finally, I think what I got her turned was, I said, look, my 86-year-old mother lives in town. I said, my sister lives in town. We put these meters on their house. I said, would I put these meters on their house if it was going to endanger their health? And I was surprised it worked. She stopped and she said, you're right. I don't think you would. And she backed down and made her think anyway. But it's just true. I mean, we're not putting anything out there dangerous. And she was concerned we were going to be collecting a bunch of data from her and then going to be, doing stuff with her lights and everything else. And I said, we're just getting meter reads. That's all we're interested in.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of reinforces the local control thing and that you're there in the community. So if you do run into that or other issues, sometimes I think it does help, whether it's water quality issues or other things, it does kind of just help to remind them like I drink the water every day, or, my mother, I wouldn't do that to my mother or my sister, that type of thing. So anyone else hear any complaints or any? Steve's nodding his head. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we had you always have a vocal few that read things off the internet and think that it's going to cause them all kinds of problems while they're talking on their cell phone to you, about how these EMF fields are going to cause problems. What we did is we allowed people to opt out. And that so as we were doing the project, that kind of kept that resistance from building, is because we said, if you want to opt out, you can opt out. Now that the project's finished up, then we started instituting a meter reading charge for the folks that have opted out as we finished up the project and said, okay, you're either going to have to get to the point where we're going to put in an AMI meter or we're going to start charging you a fee. I think we charge $40 a month for a meter reading fee. And we still have 40 or 50 people that pay the meter reading fee because they don't want to have it. But as part of that policy, if they ever move, the first thing we do is we go into that place and change out their meter and put an AMI meter. If they move to another place in town, they don't have the option to opt out. We're not going to go change out a meter for them. We just elect not to put one in place if they want that. But that $40 charge fixed most of that. And because of the timing, that kept a resistance from building on the project because they felt comfortable that, okay, well, if we can opt out, we're okay. And the entire time we said, at some point, once we get this project done, if you opted out, we will be talking to you about a special meter reading fee because we're going to have to keep someone on staff to come read these meters.
Yeah. Well, just something to think about if you're going to it, not necessarily that it will be a discussion in your town, but something to consider and maybe be prepared for that, because you can either just tell people that they can't opt out and they have to take the meter. depending, goes back to your ordinance and how it's written, or you can set something up where they can opt out, but definitely suggest either Columbia or Springfield, or probably some other ones have some stuff that you could copy and paste or edit a little bit and turn it into your ordinance.
I think we decided to basically, you're gonna take the meter. Yeah.
We did what Springfield did. We just charged them for the manual read. And it was kind of strange. It was all quiet and then all of a sudden flyers was stuck on windshield at Walmart. So that's how we kind of stopped the momentum and it worked.
Good.
One thing we did too is we changed the narrative on the meters to where as we were going through the process, we called the smart meter the standard meter. And the non-smart meter, we called the non-standard meter. That way we were installing standard meters in their homes instead of smart meters or AMI meters. It was just, that was our standard meter.
And that probably goes back to your ordinances or yeah. That usually require that you have a standard meter. So Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to let people know, I'm thinking that like if I were going and planning AMI, that I also need to be thinking about maintenance and the years after you install it. Any tips that you can share as far as what you saw with your first system, how you're experiencing your second system?
There's no more meter maintenance than what we would see with a pre-AMI system. I mean, I think we all had meter failures of some kind, albeit low. Yeah, I think I'd mentioned, we've got a little over 6,100 meters. We've had one disconnect failure. We did have there's a video on YouTube that will show you how to close the disconnect. We had one of those. Your customers that used to take meters out of vacant buildings and put them in theirs where you'd removed it, that no longer works, and they don't know why. But from a maintenance standpoint, early on, I think a lot of the covers, the Lexan covers, we were getting some yellowing, discoloration there. I think the quality of those has improved. We haven't had any issues. The old I-70 GE were glass, so it was pretty consistent. But so far, it's been really good for us. Maintenance hasn't been an issue.
How about water meters?
We haven't moved to water meters yet. We do
Okay.
have that budgeted, I think, for the next couple of years. So we
Okay.
haven't quite taken that leap yet.
Okay. Skip, did you have something?
I say we're trying water meters at the same time. Part of the reason we went with the system was because it would integrate with what we had. And it's been a challenge. The water meters have been way more of a challenge than the electric meters. And when we kind of figured that the system we're using it basically shoots to it's not a daisy chain type thing. It's going directly to a receiver, and sometimes the line of sight's just not good enough to get a signal. So we are kind of struggling through issues trying to get the system to work completely anyway.
Anyone else have any, especially with water meters, any experiences or suggestions there? Okay. Yeah. Ron?
We've done about 80% of our water meters, which is a very small amount compared to a lot of towns, but we're about 98%. We've got a few commercial accounts on the electric that we don't have done. But other than that, we're done with all the residential electric and most of the business. And then the water meters we use jumps to the electric meter, and it's Landerson gear system as well. Water meters have been great. It's a lot more labor intensive to put in the ground. Electric meter, you can have a couple guys, you can plug them in, you can get them programmed. They're pretty quick. Change out the meter head on the water, make sure the antenna. We hired one extra guy to do the install, and he actually did our meter reading before we started with all this, and we've kind of found a place for him as we make technology work into the system. But he spends a lot of time cutting holes in meter lids to get antennas on, and we've had to do some recessed meter lids and different things to get that to work. But the water's worked great.
Good.
Of course, most people, if we did all automatic disconnects on the electric side, And shut off day, when you turn the electric off, you can usually leave the water for a day or two because when they don't have lights, they'll generally come in and pay the bill. So, so that's worked very well for us. I was just sitting here messing with our command center and just the ability to show people where they're using electricity and water. And the water side has helped us a lot with leak detection. Ours is set where if it runs more than 12 hours without shutting off, it red flags to us in the morning. So we can go back and call that person where, you know, before we had that in place, it was a good 30 days before we contacted them. They may have 100,000 gallons of water run through their meter. So that has helped us to offset some of the concern with GOAT being more modern. Now I will tell you on the water side, we really got the majority of that in the last year. And when our auditors came in, they did not understand how we billed for almost 1 million gallons more water in the past year. And they just kept on asking that question, wondering if things we were missing something, we had put something, we were billing for water. You know, if that was that many dead meters that were inaccurate, old mechanical meters that just weren't reading right correctly. Bills have probably gone up a little, but not drastic. You know, we were afraid we'd hit some that would just be astronomical different and people would just have a fit, but really hasn't been the case. But we had a rate study done on our water and sewer side based on the previous 3 years of our numbers. And when it came down to it, they were talking about wanting us to really up our charges. But after our auditors came through, we're like, do we really need to do that? Because now we're getting accurate reads. It looks a lot different. So we've kind of put that off till we get some more historical data to go with that. So, but very interesting because we'll get somebody, you know, like I pulled up here in our command center program, you have high temperature, low temperature daily reads. So, you know, somebody comes in and just having a fit. Well, maybe they were on vacation for a week and there were 4 people in the house where there was people not in the house 5 days a week. Looks a lot different when you got the air conditioner running all that time or kids are watching TV and playing games and stuff. And you have some ammunition to go show them that on paper instead of just saying, no, you used it. So, you know, those things for us have been great.
Yeah.
And we don't use near the data that it will put out. I know that.
Well, and I think that's something for people to keep in mind too, as far as I think it's very interesting, the amount of water losses that you had and how that really helped you avoid a rate increase. So I don't know how you'd handle that when you're trying to sell your city council on that. You have to kind of maybe be careful about how you brought that up. You shouldn't want to get everyone to stop you because they don't want accurate meters at their house. But I think that that's a really good side benefit to think about and figure that into your plan. Sort of like Skip was talking about as far as having someone help you with all the benefits and go through things. But that's a good side benefit. And I think also, you know, if your customer service reps don't have to deal with, why do I have a $500 water bill? And people don't understand that that's why it happens. Yeah.
I've been angry and when they leave, they're studying a little bit. We usually don't hear easily for.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of questions do we have? Any questions, Joe?
Skip, first off, I'm jealous of your 15-year-old system. Because I think I've got parts that maybe Truman himself might have installed, but so talking about older systems and older bases, when you go to AMI, I think you go from a 3-prong to a 4-prong base on a lot of them. Am I saying that right? Do you have a lot of base changes or have any of you guys experienced a lot of base?
No, we haven't.
You haven't?
If you've got an A-base adapter, with the old aluminum lid with the window in it, a new meter with a disconnect will not fit in there. It's too tall. So we ran into that issue. But typically those are probably older installations that have some code issues. We kind of work with our inspection department to kind of get those upgraded. And Really didn't have any pushback. We didn't have a lot of those left, but if you do have any of the A-base adapters, you know, we had the old A-base meter where the leads came out of the bottom. You hang a plastic adapter in there and then you put a socket meter in there. The disconnects won't fit. You won't be able to shut the lid. So
Okay. So, did you account for that in your project then to pay for the change out of those to be able to meet that or?
no, we didn't.
Or did you charge
We
the
kind of
customer?
learned that the hard way. You know, I had staff come
Okay.
back in and said, these won't work in those meter sockets. And, so we went out and looked at it and it still had the old concentric coming out of the base and it was frayed. In our system, that's the homeowner's responsibility. A lot of those were rentals that didn't have a lot of money put back into them, but, the inspection department, you know, kind of, we got them involved because there was in a lot of cases, you know, probably some dangerous conditions. So,
Awesome. That led right into my second question was if you had an older style like that, if you did an inspect, because so we've been met, you know, we're the model for how to never go to AMI. And we've been met with opposition of you're gonna spy on me, right? The radio waves, right? And then there's my house is gonna catch on fire and burn down, right? And in some cases, you know, and everybody I've talked to, well, if that's the fear when going to AMI, you should probably be in that fear right now because it means your house probably isn't up to code electrically at this moment. Me putting in an AMI meter is not changing that, but if you install it on an older home, you got the inspection department involved to make sure.
yeah, and you know, we did the installations ourselves, which, you know, that everybody's going to be different on that. We felt like, you know, we had the manpower and ability to do that. One of those opportunities was you know, because we had AMI, we hadn't looked at a lot of those installations for years. You know, when you go away from meter readers, you lose that kind of that eyes on thing. So this was really an opportunity for us to look at those situations and address them. And really do it in a way, and, you know, AMI has hot socket detection. If people are worried about their meter sockets burning up and causing a fire, you know, we've looked at your service, trained qualified people. It's okay, or there's a problem, and this new system will be even safer. So, I mean, there's some things there too. We had really good luck. Some of it took some time. We'd leave letters and, you know, it wasn't just knock on the door and, okay, I'll get it done next week. You know, not everybody's prepared for that. Their lights work. They think everything's good, but, took a little work, but in the end, I think if you're making decisions based on facts and a lot of times you take them out and show them, you know, frayed wires or whatever. I mean, you know, it's not that I want you to do this. You need to do this. So, yeah, but it worked pretty well for us.
Okay.
I'm sure you had some folks probably though that just threw down and I'm not going to do it. Is it something where you end up getting it done and either filing a tax lien or charging them or how did you handle it?
Well, I think if it was, and we tried not to do ones just because we wanted them upgraded. We wanted to make sure there was a legitimate concern. If it got to that point, I mean, we were going to shut them off.
Okay.
I mean, that's really, we can't provide
To an unsafe
situation. So,
In Springfield, if we had a problem with the base, we actually hired an electrician. We paid for it
did you?
because we didn't want it to become a thing with the AMI project that we're forcing them to some additional expenses. Now, if you went in there and their entire system was falling apart, that was different. And if it was commercial, that was different. You know,
Right.
we let them fix it. But residential homes, sometimes what it was the stabs weren't very tight. And so over the course of time, you had heating. And so when you pull it out, you know, the stabs are ready to fall apart. We weren't going to put a meter back in. So instead of dealing with the homeowner, we had an electrician on call. They came out, they changed it out real quick, and we put the meter back in and went on down the road.
Yeah. And we didn't have a whole lot, but I think, you know, I made sure when my staff brought a concern to me, it was legitimate. Just because you don't like where the meter's at, because there's this or that or whatever. I mean, you had to have sound information to take back, and we probably didn't have, obviously near the size you did. We're probably talking 20 or 30 services. So
Our biggest issue was people that sided over their meter box or, you know, their socket box and bricked over it and built something over it, so you can't get the lid up to take the meter out. I think we probably had 400 or 500 that they had to do some modification to their siding of their house so that we could actually change the meter out.
Jesus.
Yeah, sometimes you had to search for the meters. It's, we did AMI before, and you'd be surprised how creative people can be for whatever reason. They don't want to see their meter, so.
We had a question on the chat from Paul and Hannibal. With less of a need for truck rollout due to the remote disconnect, how did you adjust your disconnect fee? So anyone want to take that answer?
I think we left ours the same. Typically, and we've kind of changed. Originally, we would do water first and then electric, but then we figured out that electric is a bigger hammer. And I think once people learn that you can disconnect them remotely, I think that did help our pay cycle or their pay cycle. But we didn't change our disconnect fees. We left them the same.
We didn't either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Andy Harrisonville?
My question to you is, do you provide any of this information to your customers through a portal or something so that they can see their own usage?
We did to start with, and what we found was nobody was using it. And it was a cost that we was having to pay to keep a portal going. Even the colleges at first was interested because they thought they could monitor their buildings and save money. So we actually went out and gave them a class, and they did it for a couple of months. Then they quit. Most everybody now just calls in and asks, and we'll print something out for them.
We do, but I think, like Darren, it's not utilized very well. We don't really have a cost with it because our internal staff is able to compile that data. What we can do is, and it's been helpful, is print the monthly usage. It correlates with temperature, and you can actually email those, and provide those. We are looking at, going to time of use because we have AMI, and we're looking at maybe some other features. Our AMI meters do have Zigbee, so that would allow the homeowners, the ability to maybe add some devices that would give them a little more access to their usage, particularly for doing time of use. But we provide it, but people want to see it, and I think they get bored with it pretty quick. So, because we didn't have a cost, we've left it out there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Then Matthew from Hannibal also asked, do you periodically spot check meters to ensure the AMI reading is matching the physical meter? Matthew, I think maybe you might, maybe unmute yourself. It might need a little bit more information on your question there.
We did spot check them to start with just because we had some council concerns. So we would go do some spot checks and check that against the reported reading just to make everybody confident and because it was something new. But we didn't find anything. Everything was trued up.
Yeah, we don't spot check any of ours.
Okay.
And maybe initially we had some stuff looked a lot when we were doing the first install, but I think I'm kind of like along now. I mean, we're just plugging them in and going. They seem to be working fine. There's nothing in the data coming in that looks like it's out of line or anything.
Okay. Matthew, did that answer your question?
Yeah, in a way. I guess our concern is since we removed the manual meter reader from the field, we're not visually inspecting that water meter installed in the pit or the electric meter. So just curious if others have gone out there just to do periodic inspections to make sure, meter base hasn't been tampered with, there's no code issue or safety issue involved, or in some instances, if there's no leak in the meter pit, that sort of thing.
And one thing we found on our AMI meters, man, they have a ton of data available to figure out whether people are committing fraud. So and I'm not the expert in it by any means, but we have an area that looks at that and they can get a report of these meters are ones we suspect.
Kind of a
And they
tamper
can go out and
report.
check those, and it's some type of tamper report. And it's something about, I don't know if it's voltage or what it is, but somehow that meter has a bunch of self-diagnostics for fraud. So that you don't have to wait for someone to go out there and figure out that they've taken wires and bypassed, between the stabs on, your base or something like that. It'll tell them that something weird's going on.
Right. The electric side is one thing, but we have found we're in the process of doing some sort of leak detection, and we've found a few installations of water where it's actually leaking on the service side and not the customer side, therefore not going through the water meter, so you wouldn't know that there's a leak detector indicator going on. So just curious. That was all.
Okay, thank you. All right, looks like Laura might have a question she's typing, but we can probably grab that at the end. Let's go ahead and go to our post-AMI installation questions. Well, even though Jeff is kind of post-AMI too, but this segment of the questions. So, just kind of to get started, Daryl, can when we were talking about this, you said that utilities will like AMI once they can see what it can do. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the stories you told me where you've found like, oh, I didn't think about that, but that sure is helpful.
We had some interesting issues. One of them that was definitely, we found the AMI because you could track the time of usage, was a lady bought a house and her electric bill was it was stupid high. And if you put an amp meter on it, it was high. What she didn't know was she bought a house with a heated driveway. And the heated driveway was on, and it was wired directly to a breaker. So it wasn't even a switch that she would have noticed. And when you started looking at the time of the load would drop off to a certain point, and then it would just hold there. And it was an electric heated driveway that I guess that was a bonus that she didn't know she was getting with her house. But we've also had at the power plant, since we have the outage monitoring, we'll see flickers, or the power plant will, on just certain houses. And a lot of times that's just a loose transformer connection. So they'll dispatch a crew out there, or it's a theft. They're messing with it. But more times than not, it's a loose transformer connection, and we can go ahead and fix that during regular working hours, and the homeowner or the business don't even know what occurred. So that was a really nice thing that benefits. And if on our outage, it also tells us how many meters are out. So the guy on call, if the power plant calls him and says, hey, we got people out on Rosewood. How many? Well, it looks like 3. He just goes, or she just goes and fixes it. But it also tells them when they call him out, say, hey man, we got 75 homes out. Well, let's go ahead and call in Tommy and Butch too, because we got something besides just a simple fuse going on. So it's helped our restoration, and it's also tracked our outage times, which we log, or the computer logs, and we upload them into APPA for reliability. And instead of, in the old days, you would guess and say, hey, these houses was out for 20 minutes. We're actually getting timestamps, and the power plant logs what the cause of the outage is. And as those line personnel see that, they start understanding how important it is, and you start getting a buy-in once you get it moving. There was one section of town that we had out 2 or 3 times, but it was happening on different linemen's weeks to be on call. So nobody noticed it, but the outage programs noticed it, and it's like, hey, we've had repeats out here. So that's one way that has helped us.
So do you think having that outage map available to the public also reduces the amount of calls that you get, outage report calls?
We haven't made it available to the public yet, because, and that's something I think should be kind of discussed amongst all of us probably. I'm kind of old school. Do you really want your customers to know that the power's off in a downtown block to where they could go maybe do something? I don't know. I mean, that's a question that we struggled with.
Anyone want to weigh in on that?
We do show it on our map. I mean, we don't necessarily get to the level of like this house is on, this house is off, but we kind of show zones and then numbers of houses that are off, so you can kind of see if, with what's going on in the system. But, it's an interesting point.
The other thing we did do is we put a big TV screen downstairs in the customer service area. So they can see the outages. So when people do call in and our outage map changes, right, starts with a circle and then it's a star if it's dispatched. And, they can tell the customer, yeah, it looks like there's crews working on it now. Thank you for calling in. And it also gives it a quicker, we don't wait for the phones to ring. We know that something's out.
Yeah.
But putting that outage map with your customer service reps does seem to help a lot.
Yeah.
And it's cheap. It's just a big screen TV, so.
Well, and I think too, with making the outage map public, that might be more of a size thing too. Because if you're in a smaller town, you might not get that volume of calls. But if you have a lot more customers and your call volume's going up and then you can't answer all the calls, then that might create different problems where you have it out there for people to see. Oh, they already know that there's an outage, and oh, look, the little triangle shows up that there's a crew assigned to this outage, then sometimes that helps your call volume. But I think that that's probably one of those local decisions as far as, what your call volume is like. But when you're inundated, and sometimes if you have an outage, you have a big storm and you have an outage for a week, that might change things too, because then customers are like, oh, look, I'm staying over here, but I can look and see that my power is restored to the house.
One other benefit we've seen is with some solar installations on homes. Once they put it in, we do the inspection. One of the electric folks just takes a laptop out there and basically reprograms that meter so we can go both directions. So you're not pulling that meter, bringing it back into the shop, doing things to it. It's just a truck roll out there and a reprogram and move on.
I just saw our IT manager, director, Kevin Folks walk in. You mentioned about IT staff. Tell me about what your thoughts are on upping your IT staff and how they helped you.
When you start the process and you're starting to put your vendors together, go get your IT staff then. Don't make them work on something that us old engineers that really knew nothing of what we was talking about bought. Because we had a problem, even though the vendor said, hey, we're compatible with basically anything. Greg and I kind of got old on this project at Fulton because some of our legacy stuff, like our billing, would not work with this. And while we had Empire hired to help us with the mapping and stuff, Greg and Matt, they spent time integrating the billing system and making it work too. So I think it's very important to get your IT team put together on the very front end of it and help them develop it. And then I also got skin in the game. Like if Kevin helped and Kevin said, pick A, all right, Kevin, we picked A. You gotta help us make it work. I mean, IT's got some skin in the game because Fulton's small, so our IT staff was limited to start with. So we're replacing meter readers with IT.
Well, we invited Greg here today because Greg has, as I mentioned in the introduction, started a company. He saw a need specifically for municipal utilities and smaller utilities. As you know, sometimes you want to go with a vendor, or you think they have a solution, but it's made for someone like ComEd, not necessarily, a smaller town. So I think that was interesting that Greg, that you saw that need. And specifically, once you get all of that data, how a lot of times from what I hear from our members is that you might have got the money to get the meters and get them installed and running, but you didn't necessarily get all the money that you needed. They stopped you short before giving you all the money that you needed to get all of that data integrated with your billing systems, GIS, et cetera. So I think that the Empower product is a good filler of that niche. So Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about your product and what you're doing for Fulton?
Sure. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, well, like Daryl said, we were kind of on the bleeding edge of some of this stuff back in 2011, might have been, I think, was when we first started working together. We were, primarily at that time a GIS company. I started the company in 2006, and we were working kind of across a wide spectrum of county governments and basically anybody, GIS was a pretty novel concept at the time, and mostly only large utilities were really getting into GIS and, in the mid 2000s. But then as we started to, work with more and more municipal governments, we realized the utility folks really had the most to gain from good maps, and from there we built the first application was our outage management system, and Fulton, I think, would have been at least in the first 4 or 5 companies that deployed it. So like with any software, it got more mature and learned more from each customer. We built it. And also they had, the industry did a real smart thing by coming out with the multi-speak standard, which most of you probably heard of, which is data exchange formats, so that really a company like Empower, we work with every AMI system. We don't have to write an interface for every different AMI system out there because, we say the multi-speak standard says if you're the AMI vendor and you're going to send out an outage notification, it's got to be in this format. So an outage management software company like Empower can pick it up and put it to that data to use right away. So early on, that was a big part of our focus, was the internal operational stuff. How do we give predictive analysis, use that, data that we're getting from AMI, we're getting it faster and more data and more accurate than, randomly people making phone calls before we had the interface with the AMI. So we were able to do a lot more predictive, more accurate analysis on the data and say, I can't tell you for sure, but that's probably where the problem started. If I'm going to roll a truck, that's where I'm going to send somebody. So that evolved then into, that was probably the first big category of utilization of AMI, was outage and restoration data. The next big category, we had a customer in New England that was looking at our GIS-based software called Integrator that allows you to tap data from multiple systems. And he said, if you can pull data from the AMI system and from the customer information system, and you can look at the relationship between the customers and the transformers, for example, I think you guys would, have an inherently excellent load analysis system. To which I said, what's a load analysis system? Software guy, didn't really understand the concept. But that was a real eye opener for us because, the metering companies, if you think about it, if you're an AMI company, you can't really it's really hard to aggregate or analyze. Well, these 7 customers are connected to this transformer, right? That's done in the maps, but in order for Landis and Gear or Tantalus to be able to give you that, they'd have to have your circuit model in their system. They'd have to know those relationships. So when we were able to start tapping that load data, that incremental load data, and doing the math and being able to analyze underloaded and overloaded transformers, that really, benefited our customers. We went back to a lot of our customers that had AMI and said, we didn't know it, but we sold you a load analysis system. You don't even really have to buy anything more. We just have to connect it up for you and show you how to use it. So that was a big, kind of the second big wave of AMI things that we started to do. And to this day, I mean, literally a couple hours ago, I was sitting on the phone with a customer talking to them about, how they can implement the load analysis. The more recent trends that we've seen tied to what we were just talking about with not only the public outage maps, from our experience, a very high percentage of our customers are saying we want that public outage map. And like you were saying, we don't go down to the individual meter. We have zones or heat maps and stuff that kind of show that. And it really helps communicate with the customers. So like you said, they know that you know, and that helps. And now the next thing that has, the technology has come along is for notification, direct notification of customers with either they can opt in to a notification. We have a product that does not only a virtual call center. So most of our customers prefer to take the calls during the day, even if they have the technology to not take calls. But then, when it's quitting time, they want to be able to flip that switch and let the virtual, call center, take over. And so that, again, people, it's a matter of comfort. More and more people are, used to talking to computers and, going one for this and two for that. And so, and then the last piece of that is the, a lot of customers really, our utility customers, their customers really like the notification. So the meter goes off and our outage management system picks it up. And then if the customer's opted in for text or email or voice, it, notifies them as well as when it restores. So, you know, all the trends. And of course, the other part of it is, as you kind of touched on, as well, that the people who work at the utilities are becoming much more accepting of technology and much more, wanting to be able to have good maps in the field and be able to use, the data. So it's been, a lot of change. But that's kind of our thing is we're just kind of listening to the customers saying, what do you need most? And, how can we help?
That's great. Yeah, I think that I like how it's built on each other and it sounds like I've had some pretty good experiences working with them in Fulton. Any other, Zach? I don't know if you recently decided to sign up with Empower. I don't know if you could share some of your reasons why you decided to use their services or what part of their services you're using.
Yeah, we were just looking to make a change on our GIS front, and
Okay.
again, we kind of spoke with Daryl at Fulton about Empower and stuff, and again, like I said, we were just looking to make a change there, and again, it kind of fit with what we were looking to do and things. So,
Okay. Well, just wanted to put people together if they had any questions. So I'll open the floor up. Anyone have any questions?
Connie, I have some observations and maybe there's some questions in there, but I first want to start with a little levity.
Okay.
I used to work for a utility where the local newspaper, when there were outages, volunteered to tell us who was out based on the calls they were getting from the citizens of this town. We neglected to take the opportunity, and that was probably a really bad mistake that we didn't take there. Okay, enough about that. I'm two or three things, and I don't know that this applies to anybody in the room, but maybe it does online. Anybody make an initial decision to go with an AMR and then make a decision to upgrade to an AMI? And Jeff, you were talking about this a little bit, the decision to make the on-off, the automatic connect and disconnect, that costs you some number of dollars. And I'm interested in the financial analysis that people have done when they make that kind of decision. And then overall, as you go into the idea to install an AMI and you did your financial analysis, has anybody gone back 2 years later, 5 years later and looked backwards and say, gee, we did better than we thought, or we didn't do quite as well as we thought? And the last thing I'll throw out, a couple of you have mentioned GIS. I don't think anybody's mentioned SCADA in particular, but you've heard me say on a number of occasions going forward, about any size utility needs to have a SCADA and a GIS and an AMI and a really good billing system, all of whom talk to each other really well. I continue to think that that's important going forward. So maybe there's some questions in there, maybe they're just observations, but those were the things I was thinking about, Connie.
Okay, anyone from the panel have any?
Well, our SCADA system is not tied to our AMI at this point in time. One thing we did notice on the remote disconnects, the first time we did it, a certain percentage of your citizens want to yell at somebody. Well, they didn't get to yell at the person pulling the meter. So they're showing up at City Hall mad. And to try to temper that some, the first thing we did was we put a TV screen in behind the counter with the camera pointing at the customer so they could see themselves. And that actually seemed to work some. But the first time we did disconnects remotely, we seen the tempers increase at City Hall. The other thing we did was when they came in and paid, we made them sign and say what time, or they had to call in and say when they wanted to turn back on, because we was worried about the pizza box sitting on the stove. So, in fact, I think Mr. Healy helped us with that some, trying to work out that, because we did have an outage probably about a year earlier at the high school that was just a breaker. And we closed it, but the shop left some drills turned on. And the fire department ended up responding to school because the drills sat there, they ran, they got hot. And so we do have the folks sign when they want it turned back on. And whether they're home or not, don't know. But we was worried about the pizza box on the stove.
What did you do before when you went to turn it back on? If they were, did they have to let you know when to?
No,
Stick a meter in?
usually when the guys went out and turned it back on, they would stand there for a few minutes and see the air conditioner ramp up or whatever. Same on the water meter, they'd turn it on. If it didn't quit spinning a few minutes, they turned it back off. But since we was kind of new to it, that was one thing we was really worried about, was turning somebody on that left something on when we had turned them off.
Our biggest issues that we've seen with the disconnects and the outages, it's been a huge help, because if a section goes out, generally the guys working on that section knows where that breaker is that controls that section. Kind of reduces the outage time considerably, because they don't have to go look at every section to try to find that section. Now, on the water side, what we've seen, one of the big things we find is a lot of people stealing water. We have a lot of homesteaders in our area that will come in and fill up 300-gallon totes or 1,000-gallon tanks or whatever. And we've had the bank that's 2 doors down from City Hall finally had to put a lock on their frostproof, because they'd have 10,000 gallons of water disappear that they couldn't figure out. But the lock on the hydrant didn't have that anymore. So, those type issues we've really benefited from. On the SCADA side, we have tied in our lift stations to our outage notifications. I don't know how they did it. That's not my area of expertise, but that's been a pretty good deal, because we have a couple kind of outlying lift stations that have been problems with grease problems, things like that, from restaurants and whatnot. And that's been a big thing. And then on the billing side, our biggest struggle with the whole thing has probably been integrating it with our Summit billing software. It's just been a nightmare. Once you get it figured out.
You're apparently the only one, Ron.
Yeah, you're the second one. But we have to upload a spreadsheet to them every month and get it sent back out. Now, once it's all in there, it's fine. But if there's one digit off somewhere, it's going to throw everything off. I think the billing software companies have not worked very well with upgrading to these type systems. And the same way with net metering, that's gonna be another dog in that pony show. Yeah, I mean, that's just the long and short of that, but, the billing has been the big issue with us.
But to answer part of Mr. Twitty's question about the money, one thing we did find, which isn't from his question, but it did jog my memory. When we first did our electric meter change outs, we had some houses that had they were still functioning, they were just functioning very slow. So when we saw that, we went back and we changed a whole bunch of the older gas meters. We said, okay, electric meters are slow, it's a mechanical register, gas meters are probably doing the same thing. So we did measure some more usage. The water meters, we took the oldest water meters we could find and had them tested. We didn't see the water meters dropping out of bandwidth, but the gas meters were, and I don't think we would have noticed it except for the big change we saw in some electric meters. That really wasn't that old a meter.
Daryl, I've always been told that as meters age, they get faster.
Yeah, that's that newspaper.
Are you suggesting that's not correct?
I'm suggesting that's not correct. Yes, sir.
I would agree with that comment. We didn't see the savings on the water side that we were kind of told that was out there. There really wasn't that much difference. Now here on the electric side, there was a difference, but no, there wasn't much change on the water.
And that shocked us also. We
Yeah.
thought the water would be really dropping off.
Yeah.
So I think earlier I missed, Matthew Jones, you had raised your hand and I think I missed it. So if you want to comment or question.
I was just going to comment on the integration or implementation of AMR and then the eventual migration of AMI. We installed AMR on both water and electric in 2004. We nursed that system longer than we probably should have to squeeze every dollar out of it that we could until we reached a point to where the vendor no longer supplied parts for it. So we had no choice. We started our conversion to AMI in 2019. What we have found is the implementation of AMR back in 2004 actually cost slightly more than what our AMI migration has cost us so far. We're roughly 200 electric meters and less than 20 water meters before we're fully rolled out for AMI. So I don't really have that good idea as far as return on investment, but we're hoping anyway, and I'm using air quotes that you can't see, future-proof some of that by all of our new meters for 2S single phase have remote disconnect, whether we use them or not. They all have the capability of doing net metering, whether we use them or not. Has 2 registers to detect forward and reverse rotation. It does have the capability of helping us with time of use monitoring because we are doing interval data for both water and electric as well. So we feel from an organization standpoint that not only are we benefiting from that newer technology, but our customers in the future, should we implement, time of use or ratcheted demand or any of those things, we'll be able to, I guess, more easily roll out those programs with this technology in place.
Thanks for sharing that, Matthew.
As you're talking about the return on investment, from what we've figured since we've had the majority of our electric in for almost 2 years, that we should see a complete recovery of our investment in 4 years, and we had figured 7.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
One thing along the lines of return on investment that our customers have seen is, with the load analysis, is not only being able to see, with electric vehicles and everything, that they feel like they're able to foresee where there could be some, if 2 more people in this area subdivision plug in a car, it's probably going to push that transformer over the top. But one of the things that surprised us, because when we first started doing load analysis for people, it was mostly that. It was mostly looking for overloaded transformers that were in a hazardous place where they're going to, next heat wave, they're going to break down. But then with the supply chain problems and all of this stuff over the last couple of years, we had a webinar where we had mostly our customers featured, showing how they were in essence, finding greatly underloaded transformers in their system that could easily, particularly by looking at a map, saying, okay, this one's, very underloaded, but the transformer next to it is fine. We can take these two customers and connect them to this transformer now, instead of waiting 60 weeks for a transformer, we actually, take one down and use it somewhere else. So that's been just kind of an inherent benefit. Obviously, I think most people would just prefer the supply chain issue get fixed, but
Yeah, well, we've had a couple of our cities that do that. I think that was a very good point to bring up. It's finding out where that is, and if you're in an emergency situation and the council's telling you will put in this new subdivision, that's a good way of finding it. So, all right, looks like we've reached the end of our time. Any additional comments or questions?
Steve had some.
No, and I can ask this later, but one question real quick, Greg. Does your system look to verify that the transformers are actually mapped to the houses correctly? Do you use the AMI data to verify that?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know I've seen systems when they first run that, those aren't always the most accurate maps of
Right.
which transformer goes to which house. So when you're doing that load analysis, if you haven't done that, you're it's not gonna be worth anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. All right. With that, thank you for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for sharing your experiences and people participating in the meeting. And we'll go ahead and close it out.